Hello, class. I'm here to talk about Module 5, Objective 1 today. We're going to talk about psychoanalytic theory and how it relates to substance use in this chapter. So without further ado, let me go ahead and share my screen and get that slideshow up. So as I mentioned, we're going to talk about psychoanalytic therapy and substance use, or psychoanalytic theory, and how it relates to therapy for substance use. So here are our objectives, and right now I'm just going to do Objective 1 in this video. We're going to outline the basic history and main concepts of psychoanalytic theory. Then we'll discuss how psychoanalytic concepts relate to addiction in Objective 2, and then we'll explain how psychoanalysis is used for treatment of substance use disorder. Okay, so for Objective 1, we're going to, again, outline the basic history and main concepts of psychoanalytic theory. So psychoanalytic theory is the theory. What is born out of that in terms of the therapy is usually called psychoanalysis. So what is psychoanalytic theory? The theory basically is a theory to explain mental disorders, and it was originally proposed by Sigmund Freud, and he lived from 1856 to 1939. So you can imagine, if you remember back in history, how things were regarded, how substances were regarded during that time. It was in the late 1850s that people started to become concerned about substance use, but still a lot, when people were drinking very heavily, other drugs had been legal for a very, very long time and wouldn't take on illegal aspects until 1914 with the Harrison Act. So, this was a time in which people were considering a lot of substance use. And during the time in the early 1900s, we did see psychoanalysis being quite popular, Freudian therapy becoming quite popular for substance use. So the idea here behind psychoanalytic theory is that when you have a problem behavior, that is caused by conflicts that started in childhood and became repressed or shut down. Okay, so say, for example, you have some conflict over potty training with your mother or father who's trying to potty train you, and it's a very difficult time for you. You may not remember that conflict now, but the idea is that it's been repressed or pushed down into your consciousness to an area of your mind called the unconscious. And that holds these repressed conflicts largely from childhood. So the goal, since these conflicts are causing behaviors like depression, anxiety, substance use, and other kinds of psychological disorders, the goal is to bring that conflict to the conscious mind, to get it out of the unconscious, to bring it up, become aware, and deal with it. And for that, we call this an insight therapy, meaning that the goal is to gain insight. And if you can gain insight, you're going to be able to solve the problem, or at least deal with the problem. So the treatment that comes out of psychoanalytic theory is called psychoanalysis, and it is based on the theory of this repressed conflict. And the therapist in this case is going to be called an analyst. And so they're analyzing this repressed conflict, this unconscious mind. And typically the way it looked, back in the day under Freud, is that the patient would lay on a couch and then the analyst would kind of sit behind the patient and just largely spend their time taking notes. And they would be pretty silent and they would interpret a lot of what the patient says, but they're not going to add very much. The idea was that if you wanted these unconscious conflicts to come out, the patient had to be comfortable, and then they would just kind of slip out on their own. So the therapist or analyst did not want to be very directing in that, because you wanted to make sure that these unconscious slips would be allowed to come out. Okay. So Freud talked about 3 different forces determining behavior, and I think these we can relate to on a personal level oftentimes. So the behavior that you exhibit is going to be an interaction between these three forces. The forces are called the id, the ego, and the superego. So the id is just a very selfish force that wants things. It wants pleasure, largely. It operates on something called the pleasure principle. And the impulsive nature of the id has, under the theory, had much to do with sex and aggression. And so a lot of times under Freudian theory, sex and aggression will be brought up, and we'll talk about that again throughout these assignments. So the id is instinctive. It is wish motivated. It exhibits craving. It's got these kind of internal drives and urges that push you to do something. For example, maybe to use a drug. And again, it's unconscious, and it just pushes for pleasure, pleasure, pleasure. Okay, well, let's flip down to the ego. The ego basically wants to satisfy the id's desires, but the ego is a little more logical, because it says, well, we got to really, acknowledge the reality of the outside world. So, the id may, for example, want to beat somebody up, right? And so the id is about to punch somebody out. And then the ego goes, hey, wait, we can get back at this guy, but not right here where all these people are going to see us. So, because we could get arrested or something like that. So it operates in the terms of the outside world, but it still tries to satisfy the id. And so because it operates on this more logical basis, we call it that operation the reality principle. It operates on the reality principle. And then finally, the superego is a part of us that basically is about morality. It says that this is right or this is wrong. And so in this case where your id is saying, I'm going to punch this guy out, and the ego goes, wait a minute, let's do it when not so many people are around. And then the superego goes, but aggression is bad and wrong, and you shouldn't punch that guy at all. And so that is often called our conscience. Okay, couple more concepts. So now that you know about the ego, we're going to just deal a little bit with the ego and anxiety and defense mechanisms. So anxiety under psychoanalytic theory is very similar to how you would imagine anxiety to be in our everyday language. Anxiety warns us of danger. We get anxious because we think that there's some potential or impending danger. But under psychoanalytic theory, anxiety basically kicks the ego up into self-protection mode. It says, now I got to protect myself. And so the ego then can adopt certain ways of protecting itself from all this anxiety. And sometimes these are irrational. They're generally considered to be unconscious. The person can't really control things. Can't really control this. And what the ego does is it distorts reality. And those kinds of distortions we call defense mechanisms under Freudian theory or psychoanalytic theory. So I'll give you some examples of defense mechanisms here. There are a whole bunch of defense mechanisms, so we won't talk about all of them. But let's talk about a couple of them that are common to or commonly used in substance use therapy. So one of them is denial, and denial involves blocking awareness of some things. The situation is just too much to handle. This idea that I am an addict is plaguing my mind. It's too much to handle, so I just go, nope, can stop at any time, not a problem. Okay, so or a smoker may refuse to admit to themselves that smoking is bad for their health. Instead, they're just be like, no, my grandma lived till 95. She smoked 3 packs a day, right? You probably heard that. Repression is another one, and this is one that's again frequently used. It's basically like, I'm not going to think about that. I'm just pushing that right under the rug. I'm just not thinking about it. It's too disturbing to think about. So goodbye. Okay, so anyway, all of the rest of these are also defense mechanisms. So you can pause and take a look at how those come out. So okay, so basically, if you are in psychoanalytic therapy or psychoanalysis, they're going to operate according to psychoanalytic theory. And psychoanalytic theory, remember, says that there's all this conflict and it's in our unconscious mind and it's from childhood and blah, blah, blah. And we got to bring that out. So there are certain techniques that the analyst will use to try to bring that out. And here are some of the techniques. First one is free association. So this is where the patient just lays on the couch, the therapist sits back behind the patient with some notes and all that, and basically says, just say whatever comes to your mind. The therapist doesn't give any prompting. He doesn't say, talk about, that time in childhood. No, whatever comes to your mind, because there's always something on your mind, right? There's some ticker tape of thoughts that are going through. The idea is just to blue, 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 flow it out your mouth. And in that talk, the therapist can then interpret, oh, okay, this part appears to, relate to some conflict, and get an idea for what those conflicts are. Dream interpretation is another idea. Remember, how will the unconscious mind come out? Well, the unconscious mind comes out when the person is very comfortable. So sleep is one of those times in which a person is very comfortable. And so Freud did a lot of dream interpretation. That was the idea that the patient would tell him their dreams, and then he would interpret symbols in the dreams that represented the unconscious. And again, a lot of the unconscious conflicts had to do with sex and aggression. And so, you had these pretty funny symbols under Freud, where basically anything that was like, long, or like a stick or an umbrella or something like that, might be interpreted as a penis. Yeah, I know, it's pretty crazy, but he was pretty crazy, and I think you'll get a feeling excuse me, a feeling for that when you watch one of the videos. Anyway, okay, resistance. The therapist might observe certain things in therapy. And that's when a person sort of dismisses something, when it says, oh, but you don't need to know about that. They may hold back on talking about some particular thing. They may become hostile at the therapist because they think they've been led into some territory. And really what the therapist interprets that as is that this is a sensitive issue in the unconscious mind. And the person is putting up that defense mechanism. There is a roadblock. They're resisting. And the idea is they're keeping it from coming out. It's repressed. And so resistance is one of those things that the therapist can use to say, aha, that's an important issue. Okay, finally, transference. Patients will transfer feelings and behaviors from past relationships to the therapist. And so, for example, if a patient becomes, let's say, sexually attracted to their therapist, that may, and I know this is, again, crazy, be interpreted as sexual attraction toward the opposite sex parent that occurred early in life. And that has to do with other areas of Freudian therapy. Just know that we presumably play out the behaviors that happened early in life and the relationships that happened early in life. Those might be transferred onto the therapist, and that's what transference is all about. Okay, next time we're going to talk about objective 2, how psychoanalytic concepts relate to addiction, and I'll see you next time.